We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi and Aleph and Meseches Sukkah. This is Sukkah Daf 10a. The Gemara here is going through various cases where you have a Sukkah al gabe Sukkah. Here we have a case where the Tachtona, the lower Sukkah, is going to be kosher, and the upper Sukkah is going to be pasul. Hechidami, what's the case? Kegon shatachtona tzilsa meruba mechamasa. You have a situation where the lower Sukkah has more shade than sun. The Elyon and the upper Sukkah chamasa meruba mitzilsa, it has more sun than shade. The kaimi tarvayu besoch esrim, and they're both within 20 amos of the ground. And we're going to see Rashi will explain this as well. And then the Gemara says sometimes you can have a case where the upper one is kosher and the lower one is pasul. Hechidami, what's the case? Both of them have more shade than sun. The kaima elyona besoch esrim, and the upper one is within 20 amos. So again, now you're going to have a problem with the lower one because it's sukkah al gabe sukkah. You can't have a sukkah underneath another sukkah, but the upper one, which is within 20 amos, is totally fine. It's tzilsa meruba, and it's a kosher sukkah. And so the Gemara says, Pshita, isn't it obvious? Why do we have to say all of these cases? All of these cases really are obvious that they would have whatever halacha they have, tachtona, elyona, etc. And so the Gemara says, no, tachtona ksheira v'elyona psula etztrichale. The real chiddush of all the cases in the list is the situation where you have the tachtona ksheira and the elyona psula. That's the case where the tachtona is tzilsa meruba mechamasa and the elyona is not. Because Mahu Detema, what might you have said? Nigzar Dilma Mitzdarev Schach Pasal Bahade Schach Kosher. We should make a gezerah that maybe you're going to end up trying to join together Schach Pasal with Schach Kosher. We'll see Rashi on this as well. And Kamash Malan, that's the chiddush over here. We don't make such a gezerah. And Rashi over here explains all of the cases that we just discussed. To Perusho, the explanation of all these cases is as follows. Shtein Ksheros Hechidami. How can you have a situation where both of them are kosher? Kegon Shatachtona Chamasa Meruba so the case would be as follows. Let's say the lower one, the sun is more than the shade. So therefore that schach is like batal, it's like it's not even there. The tarvayu miskashra and mischacha elyon. So in that situation, they're both going to be kosher just using the schach that's up on the upper one. That's of course only when the upper one, the schach, is within 20 amos of the ground. To have a schach kosher, then it's going to be considered schach kosher, af lahachshir tachtona, even to make the lower one, to make that one kosher. Shtei and psulos, what would be a situation where they're both pasul? The kaimo elyona lamala michaf. So that would be a situation again where the upper one is more than 20 legago shel tachtona. The case over here is that the upper one is more than 20 amos above the roof of the lower one. Shehi karkiyasa shel elyona. The roof of the lower sukkah is actually the ground for the upper sukkah. So therefore, in this particular case, obviously the upper one is going to be a problem because the schach is too high. And the lower one is going to be a problem because it's going to be a sukkah that's underneath another sukkah. And then we have a case, tachtona ksheira v'elyona psula. You can have a situation where the lower one is kosher, the upper one is pasul. Hechidami, what's the case? Kegon shatachtona tzilsa meruba. Again, the lower one, you have more shade than sun. The schach shel elyona lav schachu. Because the schach of the upper one, that's nothing. It's chamasa meruba mitzilsa. V'lo mifsala tachtona mishum sukkah tachasukkah. So you don't have a problem with sukkah tachasukkah if the upper one's not even a sukkah. V'elyona psula. Now the upper one is pasul mishum dechamsa meruba mitzilsa because it's got more sun than shade. Uchegon dekaimi tarvayu b'soch chaf la'aretz. Now Rashi here points out, and this is going to be important, that both of them are actually within 20 amos of the ground. The elyona lamala mi'asrim, because if the upper one was more than 20 amos, the schach was more than 20 amos high, Av tachtona psula, then actually the lower one would be pasul, mishum de mitzdarev schach pasul bahade kosher, because then you'd have an issue of a mixture of schach pasul and schach kosher, mishum de schach lamala me'asrim psula. Rashi says that anytime you have schach that's above 20 amos, it's automatically pasul because it's too high, and then when you're mixing together those two, it's going to be a problem. Avol kikoi b'sochaf, but if it's within 20 amos, so it's no problem. Let's start if you could join together the two schachs, that's not going to be an issue, and it's not a sukkah tachas sukkah because the upper one's not really a sukkah, it's chamasa meruba. As we just said, as long as the shade on the upper one is not more than the sun, the tifsal tachtona mishum sukkah tachas sukkah. Then you have a different issue that the lower one's a problem of sukkah tachas sukkah. Hechidami de tachtona psula mishum sukkah tachas sukkah. Again, you can have a situation where the lower one is pasul because it's sukkah tachas sukkah. And then you have a situation again where the upper one is within 20 of the roof of the bottom. Do karkiyasa d'elyona, then the lower one can serve as the floor of the upper one. And so the upper one would be kosher in that case because again it's silsa meruba and it's using the roof of the lower one as its floor. Pshita, so then the Gemara said, isn't this obvious? What's the big chiddush? Obviously, if one of them has more sun than shade, you don't have a problem. Sukkah tachas sukkah. Umayashmin and Rabbi Yirmiyah. What's Rabbi Yirmiyah? What's he even teaching us? If you have a sukkah that has more sun than shade, it's not a sukkah. And then you've eliminated the issue of sukkah tachas sukkah. And so the Gemara says, Tachtona ksheira v'alyona psula tzricha lekadekayim alyona b'so chaf. The issue is as follows. Let's say you have a situation where the lower one, like we said, is kosher, and the upper one is puzzle, that the upper one has more sun than shade, so it's not a problem, and it's within 20 amos, because I might have thought because maybe there'll be a situation like Rashi said before, where accidentally the upper one is above 20 amos. And then he's going to have a problem because he's going to think it's no problem because the upper one's more sun than shade anyway. But it really is a problem, because if the upper one is higher than 20 amos, you have a problem of mitzdarev schach pasal with schach kosher. The upper one has pasal schach because it's too high, and it's joining with the lower one. The guy is going to think that the upper one has more sun than shade, so it's like it's not there. V'lo pasal l'tachtona, it won't pasal l'tachtona. So therefore, kamash malon delogas, and so therefore maybe you think to make a gezerah for that issue. So kamash malon delogas rinan ha'atuha. That's the chiddush over here. We don't make a gezerah. In other words, if you have a situation where the upper one is more sun than shade and it's within 20 amos, we're going to say it's fine, the lower one, and we're not going to be worried about a case where it's above 20 amos, in which case it would be a problem of mitzdarech schach pasal with schach kosher. That's not going to be a concern. There'll be no gezerah. And the Gemara continues, ben sukkah. Technical question, how much space does there have to be at minimum between the two sukkahs, the one that's on top to the one on the bottom? How much space does there have to be in order that the lower one would be considered puzzle? Rashi over here says, how much distance does there have to be between the schach of the upper one and the schach of the lower one? That it should be considered you have one sukkah under another sukkah. In other words, if it's a tiny amount of space, maybe the upper one's not a sukkah at all because it's too small. The lo name achat sukkah, maybe we're going to say that it's all one sukkah. At what point, how much space does there have to be that it should be considered sukkah tachas sukkah? So the Gemara has a few opinions. Amar Rav Huna says tefach, just a tefach. As long as there's a tefach of space, it could be considered sukkah tachas sukkah. Shekein matzino bali tuma tefach. That's what we find by tumas ohel. The amount is a tefach. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, and the Mesoras Hashas changes this to the Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah. Tefach al tefach, burum tefach. You have an area of a tefach by a tefach with a height of a tefach. There's the height of a tefach. So maybe es hatuma, that's maybe the tumah, which means all the area under that oel is going to be tameh, everything within that area under the oel. The chotzitz b'fnei hatumah, and also the roof is going to create a chatzitza separation, so the tumah will not go above this area of the roof. Avol pachos merum tefach lo mevi v'lo chotzitz. But if it's less than the height of a tefach, there's no halach of mevi es hatuma, no halach of it's not considered an oel. So just like it's not considered an oel for the hilchas aholos, for hilchas tumah, so too it's not going to be considered a sukkah in this case in terms of the halach of sukkah tachas sukkah. Rav Chisda, Rav Bar Rav Huna Amri. Now Rav Chisda and Rav Bar Rav Huna, they say arba, it has to be 4 tvachim at minimum. Shalom matzinu makom chashav pachas me'arba. We don't find that a place is considered a makom chashav, an important space, an important area, if it's less than 4 tvachim. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says asar, it actually has to be 10 tvachim, which is the minimum size in general for a sukkah. My time at the Shmuel, what's the reason of Shmuel? Kach sheira, kach pasula. The minimum size for making a sukkah that's kosher is also the minimum size for making a pasul in terms of the halach of sukkah tachas sukkah. Ma'ach sheira ba'asar, just like the minimum height of a sukkah is 10 tvachim, af psula ba'asar, so too the psul of sukkah tachas sukkah only happens when the upper sukkah is 10 tvachim high. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Imein diyurin boel yon, if there's no one living in the upper sukkah, hatachtona ksheira, so then the lower one is kosher. So the Gemara says, my ein diyurin, what does it mean there's no one living there? Ilema diyurin mamish, if it means that literally you have to have people living there, atu diyurin kagarmi, do you think the fact that people are living there is what causes this psul? Of course not. The psul is sukkah tachas sukkah. It makes no difference if there are people living there or not. Elolav, rather, what does it really mean? What does Rabbi Yehuda mean? My ein diyurin, what does it mean there's no one living there? Kol she'ena ru'uya ladira, it means that it's not fit to live there. It's giving us a height. It's giving us a minimum requirement in terms of the dimensions. Vehechi dami, what's the case? Delo gavo asara. The idea over here is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it's not 10 tvachim high, then you don't have the psul of sukkah tachas sukkah. And the Gemara says, Mechlal, that implies, that's only Rabbi Yehuda shita. That implies the Tanakama sover, that the Tanakama holds, Afa pishe'ena ru'uya l'dira psula. Even though it's not ru'uya l'dira, it's pasul, it doesn't need to be 10 tvachim high. And so the Gemara is now saying that this shita, by implication of the Rabbanan, would seem to contradict Shmuel's position that you need to have 10 tvachim. The Rabbanan seem to clearly say you don't need to have 10 tvachim in order to have the psul of sukkah tachas sukkah. So the Gemara answers, Kiyasa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came, Omar, he said as follows, Amri b'ma'arava, they say in the West, the following is the real interpretation of Rav Yehuda. Imena tachtona yechola lekabel korim v'kistos shel alyona hatachtona ksher. What it means is as follows. If the lower sukkah it does not have a strong enough roof that it can hold the pillows, the blankets of the upper one, then the tachtona is ksher, because that's not a real sukkah. The upper one is not considered a real sukkah if the floor is not a certain strength. That's really what Rabbi Yehuda was saying. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Mechlal, that implies the Tanakama savar afa pi she'eno ru'uya l'kabel psula. Sounds like Tanakama is saying, even though the upper sukkah, the floor of the upper sukkah cannot hold a minimum amount of weight or a minimal amount of weight, it's still going to be considered a sukkah, it's still going to be puzzle. And the Gemara explains as follows. Ika beina, you know, the difference between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda is as follows. The yechola l'kabel al yidei adachak. It's a situation where really comfortably the floor of the lower sukkah cannot really hold the stuff of the upper sukkah, but it's able to hold it. Al yedei adachak, if you force the situation, it could hold it. That's the machlokas. Rabbi Yehuda says that's still not considered enough. That's not considered a sukkah. It's not going to be puzzle. Tanakama says no. If it's yichola l'kavel al yedei adachak, that's enough for the upper sukkah to be considered a sukkah and create the psul. And the Mishnah says, Pires oleh sadin mivnei hachama o tachteh mivnei hanesher. Let's say a person has a sukkah and he takes a sheet and he spreads it either above the schach to protect himself from the sun, or he spreads it beneath the schach because he's trying to protect himself from the falling leaves. O shapiras agabe hakinaf, or let's say the person has a 4-post bed, meaning they have a bed where there are posts on all 4 corners, and they spread a sheet on top like a canopy. In all of these cases, psula, it's going to be pasul. Aval poresu agabe nakalite hamita. He is allowed to spread a canopy over a 2-post bed, meaning at the head of the bed and at the foot of the bed, in the middle over there, he has a post on each side, and then he spreads a canopy so that the canopy is slanted. In that case, it's not going to create a psul. And Rashi over here explains, Hanesha shaloyu alin v'kismin and notion al shulchanu. He doesn't want the leaves and the wood chips to fall on his table, so he spreads a sheet. V'sodin davar makabel tumahu. Rashi says the sheets are something that's makabel tumah. Upasul eschach, things that are makabel tumah are pasul to be schach. So you basically have pasul schach over here. O shapir salgabe kinaf. He puts it on this 4-post bed. Kilomar afilu lo pirs v'nei hanesher alanoy al mitas. So he just does it for a design. You put a canopy on your bed so that it looks nice. So the hash Rashi says now it's not schach, you're doing it as a design for the bed. Still, mifsula, it's still a problem. It's still going to be a problem. It's not going to be a problem because davar makabel tumah, Rashi says, because again it's not for schach, but it's still psula misham de'eno yoshe b'sukkah. It's still a puzzle because he's not sitting in a sukkah. He's got an ohel that is separating him from the sukkah. The sheet that's on this 4-canopy bed is basically a separation between him and the schach. On a 2-post bed, it's fine. She'enon el shnayim, just 2 posts. Ve'hen yotzin be'emtza mita echad l'mereshoseh ve'echad l'ragleh. It's just in the middle of the bed, at the head of the bed and the foot of the bed. Ve'nosin klunsa mizel lazeh. You have a little pole that goes from one to the other. U'parson all of a sudden, then he puts a sheet on it. Ve'umeshapeh l'kan it's slanted. U'misham de'ein lo gag tefach. This is the key. Since the slanted canopy doesn't have a roof that's a tefach wide, rochav lamal, that's a tefach wide on top, lo mikri oel. It's not called an ohel, and as long as it's not called an ohel, it doesn't separate you from the schach. That's why it's kosher. And the Gemara says, Amar of Chisda says, Lo shanu elam ivnei hanesher. When the Mishnah says it's problematic to have these sheets, that's only a problem if it's again to prevent the falling leaves. But if it's just to make the sukkah look beautiful, more beautiful, then it's kosher. Gemara says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? That's exactly what the Mishnah says. If you do it for the falling leaves, it's a problem. That implies you do it for other reasons to be kosher. That's exactly what's tanan in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, now you might have thought that even if it's to beautify the sukkah, still it would be a problem. And the only reason the Mishnah gives you a case that you're doing it because of the leaves that are falling, or that's just the normal situation. Most people will spread a sheet for that reason. Kamash Malon, Sort of Chist is teaching you, no, it's only if it's done for that reason. If it's done to beautify the sukkah, it doesn't create a psul. Gemara says, Lema Messiah, let's bring a proof from the following. It says, Sichacha kilchas, if the person put up the schach properly, ve'itra bekramin uvesadinin hamitzuyarin, but then you beautify the sukkah with curtains, with sheets that have designs on them. V'talaba goes in shkedim afarskin v'rimonim parchile anovim v'ataros shel shibolin yeno shmonim v'siltos, and you decorate the sukkah with nuts, with various kind of fruits that you hang up in the sukkah. So asur lehistapik mehen, so it says you're not allowed to get any benefit from these things. These become part of the sukkah, and they become, in a sense, muksa that you can't benefit. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Amud Beis.